Are you kidding me? The sharp voice of the officer cut through the late afternoon air like a knife. Cars were pulling in and out of the busy grocery store parking lot, but all eyes turned toward the commotion. There, standing small and trembling beside her scratched-up bicycle, was 12-year-old Maya. Her big brown eyes were filled with panic, and her little hands clutched her backpack as if it were a shield. The officer, a tall man with mirrored sunglasses and a puffed-up chest, loomed over her like she was a hardened criminal instead of a child who had simply bumped her bike into a parked car. No damage had even been done, yet someone had called the cops, and now Maya was trapped under his glare. "Well, speak up," he barked. "Where are your parents?" "My mom's coming," Maya whispered, her voice trembling but firm enough to carry a spark of hope. She wanted to sound braver than she felt, but the knot in her throat made the words stick. "Oh yeah?" The officer sneered, folding his arms. "And just where is Mommy right now?" The girl took a shaky breath. "She's in the military," Maya said, her voice stronger this time. "She's in Special Forces." For a split second, the officer froze as if the words didn't quite register. Then suddenly his head tilted back and he exploded into laughter. The kind of mocking, dismissive laugh that cut deeper than any insult. "Special Forces? You?" He bent down slightly, pointing at her with disbelief. "Kid, do you know what Special Forces even is? That's not some little club at school. That's the real deal. And you're telling me your mom is out there fighting terrorists? Please." His laugh echoed across the lot, and a few people passing by turned their heads. Some frowned, some looked away awkwardly, but no one stepped in to stop him. Maya's cheeks burned hot. She wanted to crawl inside herself to vanish, but she also wanted to scream at him that he was wrong. "She really is," Maya said, her voice trembling. "My mom is the bravest person I know. She trains all the time, she's strong, and she's—" "Enough," the officer cut her off, smirking. "I've been a cop for 20 years. I can tell when a kid's making up stories. Let me guess, next you're going to say she parachutes into enemy territory and takes down bad guys all by herself? Maybe she even rides on rockets, huh?" He laughed again, shaking his head. Maya's chest rose and fell quickly as tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't care about herself. What hurt most was hearing someone mock her mother, the woman who worked so hard to protect people, the woman Maya admired more than anyone else in the world. "She does missions overseas," Maya blurted, anger bubbling through her fear. "She doesn't even tell me everything, but I know she risks her life. She's a hero. You shouldn't laugh at her." The officer squatted down so they were face to face, his smirk never fading. "Listen, sweetheart. I don't know what kind of stories your mom's been telling you, but this Special Forces thing? That's make-believe. You probably saw it on TV and thought it sounded cool. Now why don't you stop lying before I decide you're wasting my time?" His words cut deep. Maya's tears spilled over, sliding down her cheeks. She wasn't lying. Every morning she had watched her mom tie up her boots and leave the house before sunrise. She had seen the bruises and scars from training, the medals tucked away in a drawer, the quiet, haunted look in her eyes when she returned from missions. Her mom didn't brag. She didn't need to. Maya knew. The officer leaned back, shaking his head with a chuckle. "Kids these days, always making up wild stories for attention. Special Forces, Mom. Ha! That's a new one." The crowd that had slowly gathered around them stayed silent, though many looked uncomfortable. They saw the power imbalance, a little girl with tears streaming down her face, and a grown man in uniform mocking her for telling the truth. Still, nobody said a word. Maya gripped her backpack tighter, whispering almost to herself, "She'll be here soon." "You'll see." The officer raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, I can't wait. Maybe she'll drop down from a helicopter, huh? Or ride in on a tank. That's what you're expecting, right?" He laughed again, loud and cruel. But even as his laughter filled the air, Maya's heart steadied. She knew the truth. Her mother wasn't just her hero, she was the real thing. And soon, everyone else, including the smug officer, was going to find out just how wrong they were to doubt her. The officer wasn't finished mocking. His voice grew louder, dripping with sarcasm, making sure everyone around could hear him. He paced slowly in front of Maya like he was putting on a show. "Special Forces, huh? So what's she gonna do when she gets here? Kick down the grocery store doors? Roll across the parking lot like some action movie star?" He chuckled to himself, shaking his head as if he'd just heard the funniest joke of his career. Maya stood frozen. Her bike tipped over on the pavement beside her. Every word he spoke made her chest feel tighter, but she refused to look away. She couldn't. If she looked down, it would mean she was weak, and her mom had taught her better than that. Still, her lip trembled, and she had to blink fast to keep the tears from blinding her. She really is in the military, Maya said quietly, but with determination. She's in special forces. She trains harder than anyone. She's gone on missions that she can't even tell me about. She's the bravest person I know. The officer crouched down until his face was level with hers, the smirk never leaving his lips. "Sweetheart," he said almost in a mock-friendly tone, "do you know how many kids tell me stories like this? Every week I hear about dads who are astronauts, moms who are spies, uncles who work for the CIA. You kids watch too much TV." He tilted his sunglasses down just enough so she could see the disbelief in his eyes. "And you expect me to believe your mom is some kind of top-secret soldier?" Maya swallowed hard. Her small hands balled into fists. "Yes, I do expect you to believe me. Because it's true." The officer laughed again, this time even louder. His laugh carried across the lot, drawing more people closer. Some shoppers pushing carts slowed to watch, their faces a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Parents pulled their children in tighter, while teenagers pulled out their phones to start recording. It was a scene that felt both humiliating and terrifying for Maya, but she stood her ground. "Tell you what," the officer said, standing up straight and adjusting his belt. "Why don't you give me her rank? Or her unit? If your mom's so high and mighty, surely you know what team she's on, right?" Maya looked down at the pavement for a moment. She knew her mom's unit, but she also knew she wasn't supposed to talk about it. Her mom had been very clear about that. Some things were classified. "I can't tell you that," Maya said softly. The officer clapped his hands together like he'd caught her in a lie. "Aha, there it is. She can't tell me because she doesn't know. Because she's making it up." He turned slightly to the small crowd, spreading his arms as if delivering a punchline. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got ourselves the world's youngest military recruiter right here. Next thing you know, she'll be telling us her mom fights aliens." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter broke out among a few onlookers. Others shook their heads, muttering things under their breath. Maya felt her face grow hot, not just with embarrassment, but with anger. Her mom wasn't a joke. Her mom wasn't a character in a story. She was real, and she was coming. "You're wrong," Maya said, her voice rising now. "You don't know her. She's not just strong. She's smart. She can do things you can't even imagine. She's not afraid of anything." The officer cocked his head, clearly entertained by her defiance. "Oh, really? Not afraid of anything? Not even me?" He leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing her up. "Because right now you're wasting police time. And if your imaginary special forces mom doesn't show up soon, you might just find yourself riding in the back of my cruiser. How would you like that?" Maya's heart pounded in her chest. Fear clawed at her throat, but another part of her, stronger, braver, burned inside. She thought of her mother's words the last time she left for a mission. "When people laugh at you, it's because they don't understand your strength. Don't let their ignorance define you." Taking a deep breath, Maya looked him in the eye. "I'm not lying. And I'm not afraid of you. My mom's coming. You'll see." For the first time, the officer's smirk faltered just slightly, though he quickly covered it with another chuckle. Yeah, I've heard it all before. The imaginary parent who's supposed to swoop in and save the day. Well, let me tell you something, kid. Out here in the real world, fairy tales don't exist." But even as he said it, Maya's words lingered in the air like a promise. She didn't know exactly when her mom would arrive, but she knew one thing for certain. When she did, the officer who had spent the last 10 minutes mocking, threatening, and humiliating her would regret every single word. The sound of boots striking pavement broke the tension like a gunshot. It wasn't hurried, frantic footsteps. It was steady, deliberate, powerful. Every head in the parking lot turned instinctively toward the sound, as though something magnetic had entered the scene. And there she was, Sergeant Angela Johnson. Maya's mother didn't just walk, she commanded the space with every stride. Her camouflage fatigues looked worn from use, not for show. The patches on her shoulders glinted in the fading sunlight, and her boots hit the asphalt with the kind of rhythm only years of military training could produce. Her presence was like a storm rolling in, calm on the surface but with a force that could change everything in an instant. Maya's face lit up with relief. "Mom!" she cried, her small legs carrying her as fast as she could toward the figure cutting through the crowd. Angela crouched down, caught her daughter in a firm embrace, and held her for a moment. That seemed to silence even the officer's mocking grin. "Are you okay, baby?" Angela asked softly, brushing her daughter's cheek. "She laughed at me," Maya whispered through tears. "He didn't believe me." Angela's jaw tightened. She kissed her daughter's forehead before rising to her full height, her eyes locking onto the officer with a look that could stop a man in his tracks. The officer, who only moments earlier had been laughing and putting on a show, straightened his posture like a soldier caught out of line. His mocking grin faltered, his confidence suddenly fragile. Ma'am, I think we might have had a little misunderstanding here," he muttered. "Misunderstanding?" Angela's voice was calm, steady, but every syllable carried weight. "You made my daughter cry. You mocked her for telling the truth, and you threatened to take her to the station as if she were a criminal. That's not a misunderstanding. That's harassment." The officer's face reddened. He glanced at the crowd, realizing more people had gathered now. Several had their phones out, cameras pointed directly at him. His smirk was gone, replaced by the uneasy look of a man who suddenly knew he was on the wrong side of the story. Angela took a step closer, her boots thudding against the pavement. "Do you even know what Special Forces is, officer? Do you have any idea what it takes to earn that title?" Her voice rose, not in anger but in authority. It was the voice of someone who had given orders that could change the outcome of battles. The officer tried to speak, but his words stumbled over his tongue. I was just trying to—" "You were trying to humiliate a child," Angela cut him off sharply. "You saw a young black girl standing alone, and instead of listening to her, you mocked her. You thought her truth was a joke," the crowd murmured, their silence turning into quiet agreement. People shook their heads, whispering among themselves. An elderly man near the front said under his breath, "She's right." Angela kept her eyes locked on the officer. "I've led missions overseas where one mistake could cost lives. I've trained day and night to serve and protect not just this country but my family. And while I was out there risking my life, you were here, using your badge to bully a little girl. Tell me, officer, who's really serving the people?" The silence was deafening. Even the sound of cars pulling in and out of the lot seemed distant compared to the power of Angela's words. Maya stood a few feet behind her mother, eyes wide with pride. She had seen her mom be strong before, but never like this. Never this unshakable, this unstoppable. The officer shifted on his feet, his earlier arrogance crumbling under the weight of the moment. I didn't realize she was telling the truth," he finally muttered, his voice barely audible. Angela didn't blink. "You didn't even try to realize. You chose to laugh. You chose to assume. And you chose wrong." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the officer had no clever comeback, no sarcastic smirk, no dismissive laugh. All he had was silence. Angela turned back to Maya, her expression softening instantly. She wiped the tears from her daughter's cheeks and knelt again. "You did so well, baby. You told the truth. You stood your ground. I'm proud of you." Maya threw her arms around her mom's neck, clinging to her like the safest place in the world. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I'll always come," Angela said firmly, squeezing her daughter tighter. Then she stood again, facing the officer one last time. Her tone was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel in it. "Remember this moment, because next time you laugh at someone's truth, you might not just be wrong. You might find yourself answering for it in front of more than just a crowd." The officer nodded stiffly, shame written across his face. And though the scene ended without handcuffs or shouting, the damage to his pride and his reputation was already done. And in that parking lot, with dozens of witnesses and cameras recording, became clear to everyone, Maya hadn't been telling a story. She had been telling the truth. And her truth had just walked onto the scene, unshakable and undeniable. Angela stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the officer until he had no choice but to look her in the eye. Her presence was overwhelming, not because she shouted or flailed her arms, but because every word she spoke carried the weight of experience, the kind that could silence even the loudest room. "Do you have any idea what Special Forces training means?" she asked, her voice steady, her gaze unflinching. "It means months of grueling selection where 90% of people don't make it. It means learning how to survive in conditions most people couldn't last a day in. It means being pushed to the very edge of your limits and then going beyond." "That's what I do. That's what my daughter was telling you about." The officer opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He had been so sure of himself minutes earlier, laughing at Maya as if she were some silly kid making up a story. Now standing in front of the very woman he had mocked, his confidence had crumbled into dust. Angela didn't let up. She took another step closer, her boots crunching against the gravel. "I've led missions overseas where I didn't know if I'd make it back. Missions that required every ounce of courage and discipline I had. Missions that left scars you'll never see. And while I was out there serving this country and risking my life, you stood here wearing a badge, using it as a shield to belittle a child." The crowd stirred again, their whispers rising like a wave. Some nodded in agreement, others muttered under their breath. Phones were still recording, catching every word, every movement. The officer could feel dozens of eyes burning into him, judging, condemning. Angela's voice grew sharper, though still controlled. "You think mocking a 12-year-old makes you strong? You think laughing at her courage makes you powerful? Let me tell you something. Strength isn't in how loud you can laugh at someone weaker than you. Strength is in protecting those who can't protect themselves. And today you failed that test miserably." Maya stood behind her mother, her small face still wet with tears but glowing with pride. She had never seen anyone stand so tall, so fearless, so commanding. In that moment, her mother wasn't just her mom. She was a warrior, a shield, a force of nature. The officer shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance slipping further with every second. "I told I was just trying to make sure she wasn't lying," he muttered, his voice unsteady. Angela's eyes narrowed. "No, you weren't trying to find the truth. You were trying to amuse yourself at her expense. You thought her story was impossible because it didn't fit the picture you had in your head. You saw a little black girl standing alone and decided her words weren't worth believing. That wasn't about truth, it was about your prejudice." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several people exchanged looks, some nodding firmly. A woman near the front folded her arms and said aloud, "She's right." The officer's face turned red, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He glanced at the people surrounding him, their phones still up, their judgment heavy. He had walked into this situation smug and sure of himself, but now he was trapped under the weight of his own actions. Angela straightened her posture, her voice cutting through the silence like steel. "I don't need your respect, but my daughter deserves it. Every child deserves it. And if you can't offer that, then you have no business wearing that uniform." For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of car engines in the distance. The officer lowered his gaze, finally stripped of the arrogance he had worn like armor. Angela turned back to Maya, her expression softening instantly. She wiped away the last of her daughter's tears, tucking a curl of hair behind her ear. "You see, baby? You didn't have to prove anything. You told the truth. And the truth always stands tall in the end." Maya nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She whispered, "I knew you'd show him." Angela smiled gently, pulling her daughter into another hug. "I didn't have to show him. You already did by speaking up. That's real bravery." Behind them, the officer shifted awkwardly, surrounded by eyes that would never forget this moment. His silence said more than any excuse could. He had been humbled, and everyone knew it. Angela gave him one final look, a glance so sharp it cut deeper than any lecture. "Remember this," she said, "because the next time a child looks up at you and tells you something, you'd better think twice before you laugh." And with that, she took Maya's hand, turning away from him and toward the car. The crowd parted to let them through, many nodding respectfully, some even clapping softly as they passed. The officer stood frozen, powerless, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. He had underestimated a child, mocked her truth, and been dismantled by the very person he had doubted. The officer stood stiffly, his face pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time since he had swaggered over to Maya, he looked small, not in size but in spirit. The crowd's stares bore into him like 1,000 silent accusations, and the phone, still recording, promised that this moment would not disappear quietly. His earlier laughter echoed in his own ears now, sounding cruel, hollow, pathetic. He began, his voice shaky. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm sorry." The words came out flat, more a reflex than a true admission. His apology hung in the air, weak and empty, and no one seemed moved by it. Angela turned slowly, her hand still resting on Maya's shoulder. Her gaze locked onto him again, not with the fury of moments earlier, but with something even heavier. Disappointment. "Sorry," she repeated softly, almost as if testing the word. Then her voice hardened, each syllable deliberate. "Apologies mean nothing if nothing changes. You don't get to erase the way you made my daughter feel just by saying sorry. Respect isn't in your words, it's in your actions." The officer swallowed hard. His shoulders sagged under the truth of her words. Around him, the crowd nodded in agreement. Someone muttered, "Too late for sorry." Angela bent down to meet Maya's eyes, brushing her thumb across her daughter's cheek. "Listen to me, baby. What happened today wasn't your fault. You were brave enough to tell the truth, even when someone mocked you for it. That's courage. That's strength, and I want you to always remember that." Maya nodded, her eyes glistening but no longer from fear or humiliation. She whispered, "You showed him, Mom." Angela smiled softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "No, sweetheart, you did. You stood tall when he tried to tear you down. That's not easy, not even for grown-ups. You reminded him, and everyone here, that kids deserve to be heard, not laughed at." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several people clapped softly, and a few even offered encouraging smiles to Maya. For the first time that day, the young girl felt seen, respected, and believed. Angela stood again, turning back to the officer one final time. Her voice was calm but unwavering. "This uniform you wear, it's supposed to mean something. It's supposed to stand for protection, fairness, justice. But today you showed the opposite. You showed arrogance. You showed prejudice. And most of all, you showed a lack of humanity toward a child. If you want to keep wearing that badge, you'd better think long and hard about the kind of man you want to be when people are watching, and when they're not." The officer looked down at his boots, shame flooding his face. He gave a small nod but said nothing more. His silence was louder than any excuse he might have offered. Angela squeezed Maya's hand and began walking toward their car. The crowd parted like a wave, making space for them. Some people reached out to pat Angela on the shoulder in silent respect. Others mouthed words of encouragement to Maya, the little girl, who only minutes before had been reduced to tears, now held her head a little higher as she walked beside her mother. As they reached their car, Maya looked up. "Do you think he'll really change, Mom?" Angela paused, opening the car door before answering. "Maybe, maybe not. Change isn't easy. But he'll never forget today. He'll never forget being humbled in front of everyone. And he'll never forget that the little girl he laughed at told the truth all along." She smiled gently. "And that's enough. You don't have to carry his mistakes on your shoulders. That's his burden, not yours." Maya climbed into the car, her heart lighter than it had been all afternoon. Angela slid in beside her, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. Behind them, the officer still stood where they had left him, surrounded by whispers, stares, and the glow of phone cameras capturing the aftermath of his arrogance. The ride home was quiet at first, the hum of the road filling the silence. Then Maya spoke softly. "Mom, I was so scared. But I kept thinking about what you always tell me. Never let someone else's doubt make you forget your truth. That's why I didn't stop telling him." Angela reached over, squeezing her daughter's hand gently. "And that's why I'm proud of you. You don't need to be in special forces to be strong. You showed strength today in a way that matters most." Maya leaned against her mom's arm, a small smile on her face. For the first time that day, she felt safe, not just because her mom had shown up, but because she had found her own voice. The officer would carry his shame long after the parking lot cleared. The videos would circulate, the whispers would spread, and his laughter would come back to haunt him. But Maya, she carried something much stronger, the memory that she had spoken her truth, stood tall, and watched the world finally recognize her for it. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they don't need to shout or fight to prove their worth. Sometimes heroes arrive calmly, boots striking the ground with quiet certainty, and remind the world that real strength isn't in mocking others, it's in lifting them up. And sometimes, the bravest hero of all is a 12-year-old girl who refuses to be silenced.